When Jonathan Prescott's will was read, Amelia didn't receive the family farm, she didn't receive the house, and she didn't receive a single dollar. Instead, the young orphan who had spent 14 years caring for her adoptive father inherited only an old, abandoned barn. Her three brothers couldn't stop laughing. They thought Jonathan's final gift was nothing more than a worthless building waiting to be torn down. But hidden beneath that weathered barn was a secret no one had uncovered for generations. A hidden cellar that would reveal a father's final message, and a discovery so extraordinary it would forever change the Prescott family. Stay with us, because the greatest inheritance wasn't waiting inside the house. It was hidden beneath the barn. The morning Jonathan Prescott's will was read. Amelia Prescott walked into the lawyer's office already expecting to leave with nothing. She wasn't even sure she belonged there. At 24, Amelia had carried the Prescott name for 14 years, yet she had never truly been part of the family. She quietly took the last chair near the window while Jonathan's three sons, Ryan, Ethan, and Lucas, sat together across the room without even looking in her direction. To them, Amelia had never been their sister. She had always been the charity girl. Years earlier, Amelia lost both of her parents in a snowstorm car accident when she was only 6 years old. For the next 4 years, she drifted through foster homes carrying everything she owned inside one faded backpack, never believing she would ever have a place to call home. Then Jonathan Prescott found her, a widowed cattle farmer from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Jonathan had recently buried his wife. When others saw another orphan in the system, he saw a frightened little girl who simply needed someone to believe she mattered. He adopted her without hesitation. He gave her his last name, a warm bedroom, a seat at his table, and for the first time in years, someone whispered, "Welcome home." But while Jonathan opened his heart to Amelia, his three sons never did. Every Christmas, stockings bearing only the boys' names hung above the fireplace. Every family photograph somehow left Amelia standing behind the camera. At Thanksgiving, she woke before sunrise to prepare the meal, served everyone at the table, washed every dish after dinner, and quietly disappeared upstairs long before anyone noticed she was gone. No one thanked her. No one invited her to sit beside them. No one, except Jonathan. He noticed everything. In the evenings, he often sat by the kitchen window pretending to read the newspaper, but his eyes always drifted toward the yard, where Amelia carried heavy baskets of laundry, repaired broken fences, or fed the cattle before the sun came up. She never complained. Not once. More than once, Jonathan wanted to defend her. More than once. He almost told his sons how deeply they were hurting the only daughter who had never asked him for anything. But he stayed silent. Not because he didn't care. Because he believed some lessons could only be learned when life itself became the teacher. As the years passed, Ryan chased business deals. Ethan built his career in the city. Lucas rarely visited unless he needed money. Amelia stayed. When Jonathan's heart began to fail, she drove him to every doctor's appointment, organized his medication, read to him on sleepless nights, and kept the farm running through every season without ever asking what she might receive in return. The neighbors often assumed she was Jonathan's own daughter. Jonathan never corrected them. In fact, it always made him smile. A few days before he passed away, a nurse quietly asked if Amelia was family. Jonathan looked at the young woman helping him into his coat and answered with a smile. "The best family I ever had wasn't born into it." Amelia never heard those words. Now Jonathan was gone. His sons believed this morning was about dividing an inheritance. Amelia believed it was simply time to say goodbye. But none of them knew. Jonathan Prescott had spent years preparing for this day. because the greatest thing he intended to leave behind could never be measured by money. For several long seconds after the attorney finished reading the will, no one in the room spoke. The silence felt unusually heavy. Outside, rain tapped softly against the office windows. Inside, 4 lives had just been divided by a few sheets of paper. Ryan Prescott was the first to break the silence. He leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and smiled with quiet satisfaction. "Well," he said, "I guess Dad finally did the sensible thing." Ethan barely looked up before pulling out his phone. "We should call the realtor today," he said. 300 acres in Lancaster County won't stay on the market long." Lucas chuckled. "I've been waiting years for this place to be sold." They weren't talking about the farm their father had spent nearly 50 years building. They were talking about numbers, profits, land value. Not one of them mentioned Jonathan. Not one of them spoke about the man they had buried only 3 days earlier. Amelia remained perfectly still. Her eyes rested on Jonathan's old reading glasses lying beside the attorney's folder. Just a few mornings ago, those glasses had been sitting on the kitchen table next to his unfinished cup of coffee. Now they were simply another reminder that he was gone. Mr. Bradley, the family attorney, quietly cleared his throat. "There is one final matter." The room became still again. He reached into his briefcase and carefully removed a separate envelope sealed with dark blue wax. "Mr. Prescott instructed me that this document was to be opened only after the remainder of his estate had been distributed." Ryan exchanged a confident glance with his brothers. Probably another investment account. Without responding, "Mr." Bradley broke the seal and unfolded the paper. His voice remained calm. "The property, known as the Old North Barn, together with the 1-acre parcel surrounding it, is transferred solely to Amelia Prescott." Silence. Then Lucas laughed. "The barn." Ryan couldn't hide his grin. "You're serious." Ethan shook his head and smiled. "I suppose Dad figured she needed somewhere to keep old boxes." None of them noticed Amelia. She looked toward Mr. Bradley, almost afraid she had misunderstood. "The old barn?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Yes, Miss Prescott. The structure, the surrounding acre, and everything contained within it now legally belong to you." Ryan shrugged. "That's fine. No one's been inside that place for decades." Lucas laughed again. "Congratulations. You finally inherited something." He looked toward his brothers. "A falling-down barn. Amazing." The 3 of them smiled. Amelia lowered her eyes. It wasn't disappointment over the building. It was something much deeper. For 14 years, she had hoped that, somehow, she had become part of this family. 14 Christmas mornings. 14 Thanksgivings. 14 birthdays. 14 years of believing that kindness would eventually be enough. Yet sitting in that room, she suddenly realized the truth. To Jonathan's sons, she had never stopped being the little orphan their father had brought home. "Mr." Bradley gently slid a small envelope across the polished table. "The deed," he said softly. Amelia accepted it with both hands. It weighed almost nothing. Ryan stood first and buttoned his expensive coat. "I'll call a developer this afternoon." Ethan nodded. "We'll probably get a better price if we divide the land into smaller lots." Lucas looked at Amelia for the first time all morning. "You'll need to move out. The room above the garage will have to be emptied." The room above the garage. Not her bedroom. Not her home. After 14 years. It was still only the room above the garage. She remembered every season she had lived there. The tiny Christmas tree she decorated by herself. The nights she cried quietly so Jonathan wouldn't hear. The mornings she woke before everyone else to start breakfast. Every memory fit inside that little room. Yet to them, it had never belonged to her. Mr. Bradley shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Prescott requested that Miss Prescott be given 30 days before leaving the property. Ryan nodded casually. That's fair. We'll honor Dad's wishes. Amelia slowly stood. Her chair made a soft sound against the hardwood floor. She looked at each of the brothers. She remembered teaching Lucas to tie his shoes, helping Ethan prepare for his college entrance exams, baking Ryan's favorite apple pie every birthday because Jonathan always insisted birthdays deserved homemade pie. She remembered. Apparently, they did not. A small, tired smile crossed her face. I won't make things difficult, she said gently. I'll be gone before the 30 days are over. No one answered. She thanked Mr. Bradley, picked up the envelope containing the deed, and quietly walked out of the office. The hallway felt strangely empty. Outside, the rain had stopped. The cool spring air carried the smell of wet earth. Amelia drove home along the familiar country road she had traveled thousands of times with Jonathan. Every mile held another memory. The old wooden bridge where he had taught her how to fish. The white church where they sat together every Sunday. The roadside diner where he always ordered blueberry pie because he knew she loved it. She realized something that made her throat tighten. Every happy memory she had of growing up included only one person, Jonathan. By the time she turned onto the gravel road leading to the farm, the clouds had begun to break apart. Golden afternoon sunlight spread across the rolling fields. The old farmhouse stood quietly beneath the wide Pennsylvania sky, exactly as it always had. Strong, steady, waiting. Amelia parked beside the porch but didn't get out right away. For several minutes, she simply sat there with Jonathan's deed resting on her lap. Then her eyes wandered toward the far edge of the property. Beyond the pasture, beyond the oak trees, stood the old north barn. Its weathered wooden walls had faded to a soft gray after decades of wind, rain, and snow. Jonathan had never allowed anyone inside. Whenever Amelia asked about it as a little girl, he would simply smile and say, "Some places aren't meant to be opened until the right time." Back then, she thought he was talking about weak floorboards or rusty equipment. Now, she wasn't so sure. As she stepped out of the truck, voices drifted through the open kitchen window. Ryan, Ethan, and Lucas were already spreading maps across Jonathan's kitchen table. "We'll tear the old barn down first," Ryan said. "It's useless." Lucas laughed. "About time. No buyer wants an old eyesore sitting in the middle of valuable land." Amelia looked across the quiet field one more time. The old barn stood alone beneath the afternoon sky. Forgotten. Ignored. Dismissed by everyone except the man who had left it to her. She tightened her coat against the cool breeze. In 14 years, she had never once walked through those weathered doors. Now it was the only place on the entire farm that truly belonged to her, and for reasons she couldn't explain. She suddenly felt as though Jonathan was waiting there. Amelia stood motionless for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the old north barn. The late afternoon wind drifted across the open pasture, carrying the familiar scent of fresh earth and damp hay. Somewhere in the distance, a windmill creaked slowly, just as it had every spring since she first came to the Prescott farm. Behind her, she could still hear Ryan's voice through the open kitchen window. "We'll have the demolition crew here next week," Ethan answered without hesitation. "The sooner it's gone, the better." Lucas laughed. "That old thing has been falling apart for years." Amelia lowered her eyes. To them, it was nothing more than an abandoned building. To Jonathan, it had been the only thing he left her. She took a slow breath and started walking. The grass brushed softly against her boots as she crossed the pasture. Every step felt strangely familiar, even though she had never walked this path before. When she was a little girl, she had often asked Jonathan why no one ever used the old barn. He always smiled the same quiet smile. Some places have stories that aren't ready to be told. Back then, she thought he was simply protecting her from loose floorboards or rusty nails. Now, those words echoed differently. The barn grew larger with every step. Its weathered wooden walls had turned almost silver after decades beneath the Pennsylvania sun. The roof sagged slightly near one corner. One of the windows had long since lost its glass. Yet, despite its age, the building still stood with quiet dignity, as though it had been waiting for someone. Amelia reached the wide wooden doors. They were massive, dark with age, their iron hinges coated with rust. A heavy chain hung loosely across the handles. Not locked, simply wrapped around them, almost as though someone expected the doors to be opened again someday. She hesitated. Jonathan had lived on this farm his entire life. If he wanted someone inside this barn, why had he never brought her here? The question lingered only a moment. Slowly, she lifted the chain. The metal clinked softly in the quiet afternoon. Then she placed both hands against the rough wood and pushed. The doors resisted at first. Years of dust and swollen timber groaned in protest. Finally, creak. The sound echoed across the empty field. Dust floated through beams of afternoon sunlight pouring in from the opening. Amelia stepped inside. The air smelled exactly the way old memories seemed to smell. Dry wood, aged leather, hay that had long ago turned brittle with time. For several moments she simply looked around. There was nothing extraordinary. An old wagon missing 2 wheels rested against one wall. Broken farming tools leaned in a dusty corner. Shelves held rusted lanterns, cracked milk cans, and wooden crates so old their lettering had almost disappeared. She smiled faintly. Perhaps Ryan had been right. Maybe it really was just an old barn. Maybe Jonathan had simply wanted her to have one small piece of the place she had always loved. She slowly walked farther inside. Her footsteps echoed softly against the weathered floorboards. Near the back wall she noticed something unexpected. Everything was covered in years of dust, except one narrow path. Someone, at some point, had walked through this barn. Not recently, but more recently than the rest of the room. The thought made her pause. Jonathan. She followed the faint trail. It led toward the far corner where stacks of old hay bales sat beneath a faded American flag folded carefully over a wooden beam. The flag caught her attention. Jonathan had always treated the flag with remarkable respect. Every Memorial Day he raised one outside the farmhouse before sunrise. Every Veterans Day he stood quietly beside it with his hand over his heart. Seeing another flag here felt intentional. Amelia stepped closer. The hay looked untouched. Still, something about the floor beneath it felt different. She knelt down. The old straw crumbled easily between her fingers. As she brushed it aside, the wooden floor underneath appeared darker than the surrounding boards. Cleaner, almost as though it had once been uncovered. Her heartbeat quickened. "It's probably nothing," she whispered to herself. Still, she kept clearing away the hay. More straw slid aside. Then she saw it. A faint square outline hidden within the floorboards. Perfectly straight. Too straight to be accidental. Her pulse began to race. Slowly, very slowly. She brushed away the remaining straw. There, in the center of the wooden square, lay an iron ring almost completely hidden beneath decades of dust. Amelia stared at it. She had spent 14 years on this farm. She had never heard Jonathan mention a cellar beneath the barn. She reached toward the ring but stopped just short of touching it. Her grandfather at the orphanage had once told her something she never forgot. Sometimes the smallest doors protect the biggest stories, for reasons she couldn't explain. Those words suddenly came rushing back. She wrapped her fingers around the cold iron. The metal felt strangely smooth despite its age, as though another hand had touched it not so very long ago. She pulled gently. Nothing. The trap door didn't move. She tightened her grip and pulled harder. The wood groaned beneath the strain. Dust drifted into the air. Still nothing. Amelia took one step back, planted both feet firmly on the floor, and pulled with all her strength. For one long second, nothing happened. Then, crack! The old wooden seal finally broke. A deep breath of cool air rose from below. It smelled nothing like an ordinary cellar. There was no mildew, no damp earth. Instead, the air carried the scent of aged paper, cedar wood, and something almost impossible to describe. History. The trapdoor slowly lifted open. Beneath it, a narrow stone staircase disappeared into darkness. Amelia felt every hair on her arms stand up. She swallowed hard. Jonathan hadn't left her an old barn. He had left her a secret. She looked back toward the farmhouse in the distance. The windows glowed softly in the fading afternoon light. Inside, Ryan, Ethan, and Lucas were probably still arguing about property lines and sale prices. None of them had followed her. None of them even cared enough to ask where she had gone. Amelia looked down into the darkness once more. A strange sense of peace settled over her. For the first time since Jonathan's funeral, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt invited. Taking a deep breath, she reached for an old brass lantern hanging from a nearby beam. To her surprise, there was still oil inside. After several attempts, the wick caught. A warm golden flame flickered to life. Holding the lantern in one hand and steadying herself with the other, Amelia stepped onto the first stone stair. One step, then another. The light stretched across ancient stone walls, disappearing into the earth below. Whatever Jonathan had protected all these years, she was finally about to discover why he had trusted her and only her with the last gift he would ever leave behind. Amelia descended carefully, one hand gripping the lantern, the other trailing lightly along the cool stone wall. The staircase seemed to go much deeper than it should have. The old barn above wasn't nearly large enough to hide something like this. Step after step, the daylight faded until only the lantern's warm glow remained. When her feet finally reached solid ground, she slowly raised the lantern. The room before her stole the breath from her lungs. It wasn't an ordinary cellar. It was an archive. Rows of handcrafted wooden shelves lined the stone walls. Large cedar chests stood neatly arranged across the room, each one carefully labeled in faded ink. Leather-bound journals rested beside rolled maps tied with worn blue ribbons. Every box, every document, every shelf looked deliberately organized. Nothing appeared abandoned. Nothing appeared forgotten. It felt protected, as though someone had expected another person to stand exactly where Amelia was standing now. She walked slowly between the shelves. Dust covered everything, but only lightly. This wasn't the careless dust of neglect. It was the quiet dust of time. Her lantern stopped before the first cedar chest. Burned into the wood were the words, Prescott Family Archive. Below it, 1781. Amelia frowned. Her fingers brushed gently across the lettering. The Prescott family had lived on this land for generations. Jonathan had told stories about his great-grandfather clearing these fields with horses. but he had never once mentioned anything beneath the barn. She carefully lifted the iron latch. The lid creaked softly. Inside lay dozens of neatly folded documents wrapped in linen cloth. She unfolded the first bundle with trembling hands. Old military correspondence, supply inventories, hand-drawn maps, letters bearing official wax seals. Everything looked remarkably preserved. She carefully opened another package, then another. Each document appeared older than the last. Some carried signatures. Others contained names she recognized from history books. Amelia's heart beat faster. "What is all this?" she whispered. The answer came a moment later. Resting alone inside a smaller walnut box was a leather journal. Unlike everything else in the cellar, it looked comparatively modern. Its edges were worn from handling. Someone had opened it many times. Across the cover, written in Jonathan's careful handwriting, were just 6 words. "For Amelia. When you're ready." Her breath caught. He knew. Jonathan had known she would eventually find this place. She slowly opened the journal. A single folded letter rested inside. She recognized his handwriting immediately. The same handwriting that had written grocery lists, birthday cards, little notes tucked beside her morning coffee whenever he left before sunrise. Her eyes filled with tears before she had even read the first sentence. "My dear Amelia, if you're holding this letter, then life has unfolded almost exactly as I expected." She swallowed hard. The lantern flame flickered softly beside her. "By now, my sons have probably taken the house, the fields, the money, and everything they believed mattered most. Please don't be angry with them. People often mistake price for value." Amelia closed her eyes. Those words sounded exactly like Jonathan. Simple, gentle, honest. She continued reading. "For many years, I wondered whether I had failed as a father. Not because my sons became successful, but because somewhere along the way, they stopped seeing people before they saw possessions." A tear slipped down Amelia's cheek. Jonathan had known. He had seen everything. "I watched them overlook you for 14 years. I watched you serve Thanksgiving dinner before eating alone. I watched Christmas mornings when there was no stocking with your name. I heard words they believed I couldn't hear. And I watched you answer every act of unkindness with kindness." Amelia covered her mouth. All those years, she had believed she suffered alone. She had believed Jonathan either hadn't noticed or hadn't cared enough to stop it. She had been wrong. He noticed everything. Jonathan's words continued. "There were many times I wanted to stand between you and their cruelty. Many times I almost did, but I kept asking myself a difficult question. If I solved every problem for you, would they ever have to face the people they were becoming?" Amelia slowly lowered the letter. She had spent years wondering why Jonathan had remained silent. Now, for the first time, she understood the weight he had carried. His silence had never come from indifference. It had come from hope. Hope that one day his sons would choose compassion on their own. He continued, "I'm sorry I wasn't always brave enough to protect your heart. That failure belongs to me. If I could change one thing about my life, it would be that—" Amelia couldn't stop the tears now. The apology healed a wound she had carried since childhood. Jonathan wasn't asking to be forgiven. He was taking responsibility. She read on. "There is another reason I left the barn to you. Everything beneath your feet belongs to American history, not to our family. Several historians approached me over the years after discovering references to missing Revolutionary War supply records connected to the Prescott property. I never showed them this cellar, not because I wanted to keep it hidden forever, because I was waiting for the right guardian. Guardian, not owner. The single word settled deeply in Amelia's heart. Jonathan had never thought of these documents as wealth. He thought of them as a trust. Some people inherit money. Some inherit land. Very few inherit responsibility. That is what I'm placing in your hands. She slowly looked around the room again. The shelves, the journals, the maps, the carefully preserved history. For the first time since sitting in the attorney's office, the pain she had carried began to change. Not disappear, transform. She realized Jonathan had never measured her worth against his sons. He had measured her character. While they inherited property, he had entrusted her with purpose. The final page of the letter was shorter. One last thing, Amelia, don't let anyone convince you this story is about money. If experts ever tell you these records are worth millions, remember that the number is the least important part. Their true value is that they remind future generations who we once were and who we should never stop trying to become. Thank you for giving an old man the greatest gift of his life. You made me feel like a father again. With all my love, Jonathan. Amelia folded the letter carefully against her heart. The silence inside the cellar felt different now. Warmer. Almost comforting. She no longer felt like the forgotten orphan who had been given an old barn out of pity. She felt like the woman one good man had trusted above everyone else. And somehow, that inheritance was worth more than anything money could ever buy. Amelia remained in the cellar until the lantern burned low. For a long time, she didn't open another chest. She simply sat on an old wooden stool, Jonathan's letter resting in her hands. She read it once, then again, and a third time. Each reading seemed to reveal something she had somehow missed before. You made me feel like a father again. Those words echoed through the quiet room. All her life, Amelia had believed Jonathan had rescued her. Now she realized something she had never considered. Perhaps she had rescued him, too. After Margaret died, Jonathan had spent years living in a house full of people, but surrounded by loneliness. His sons had grown busy building lives of their own. Amelia had been the one who stayed, not because she expected anything, because she loved him. She carefully folded the letter and slipped it back into the leather journal. Then, for the first time, she began exploring the cellar with different eyes. She wasn't looking for treasure anymore. She was looking for responsibility. One cedar chest held carefully wrapped military journals from the Revolutionary War. Another contained hand-drawn supply routes stretching across colonial Pennsylvania. Several boxes were filled with personal letters written by soldiers to their families, letters that had somehow never reached their destinations. Amelia gently unfolded one. The faded handwriting belonged to a young soldier writing to his wife. He apologized for missing the birth of their first child. He promised he would return before Christmas. There was no second letter, no reply, only silence. She carefully placed it back exactly where she had found it. "This belongs with your family," she whispered softly. As she continued walking through the archive, she realized Jonathan hadn't arranged these documents by value. He had arranged them by history. Every shelf had handwritten labels. Every collection had notes explaining where it had been found. It looked less like a hidden fortune, and more like the life's work of a quiet caretaker. Jonathan hadn't been hiding wealth. He had been protecting memory. By the time Amelia climbed back up the stone staircase, evening had settled over the farm. The last rays of sunlight stretched across the pasture as she gently lowered the trapdoor back into place and covered it with the old hay exactly as she had found it. No one could know. Not yet. Especially not Ryan. As she crossed the field toward the farmhouse, voices drifted through the open kitchen window once again. Ryan was standing over the dining table with a map spread before him. "The demolition company can be here Monday." Ethan nodded. "The barn goes first." Lucas laughed. "Good. One less eyesore." Amelia quietly stopped walking. They were planning to destroy the only place Jonathan had trusted her to protect. She felt fear rise inside her, not for herself, for everything beneath that old floor. Without saying a word, she walked around the side of the house and climbed the stairs to her small room above the garage. That night she barely slept. The leather journal lay beside her bed. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jonathan's handwriting. "Everything beneath your feet belongs to American history." Just before sunrise, Amelia made her decision. She wasn't a historian. She wasn't an expert. She had no idea how valuable the collection might actually be. But she knew one thing. Jonathan hadn't trusted her to keep it hidden forever. He had trusted her to place it in the right hands. After breakfast, while the three brothers drove into town to meet with surveyors, Amelia returned to the small public library in Lancaster. She spent nearly 2 hours researching historical preservation organizations. Most of the names meant little to her. Finally, one organization caught her attention: the Pennsylvania Historical Preservation Office. She copied the phone number onto a small piece of paper. Then she walked outside and sat alone on a wooden bench beneath an old maple tree. For several minutes, she simply stared at the number. "What if I'm wrong?" she whispered. "What if they're just old papers?" She almost folded the paper and threw it away. Instead, she remembered Jonathan's last words. "I was waiting for the right guardian." A guardian doesn't walk away. She found a payphone outside the library and slowly dialed the number. After 3 rings, a calm voice answered. "Pennsylvania Historical Preservation Office. This is Dr. Daniel Mercer." Amelia hesitated. She had rehearsed the conversation in her mind. Now every word disappeared. "I'm sorry," she said softly. I'm not even sure if I'm calling the right place." "You may be," the man replied kindly. "What can I help you with?" Amelia took a slow breath. "My name is Amelia Prescott. My father recently passed away, and—" She stopped again. How could anyone explain something like this over the telephone? "Doctor," Mercer waited patiently. "There is no rush," he said. She closed her eyes. "I think my father may have left behind a private historical archive." There was a brief silence. "What kind of archive?" "I honestly don't know. There are Revolutionary War journals, military correspondence, old maps, letters, and a great many things I don't recognize." The voice on the other end became noticeably quieter. "Miss Prescott, has anyone else examined these materials?" "No." "Have they been moved?" "No." Another pause. When Dr. Mercer spoke again, his tone had completely changed. "Please don't touch anything else. Keep the location private. And if what you're describing is authentic or—" He stopped himself. Amelia could almost hear him choosing his next words carefully. "I'd like to drive to Lancaster personally." She blinked. "You would?" "Yes." "When would be convenient?" Amelia looked across the street. For a moment, she imagined Jonathan sitting beside her on the bench, smiling, that quiet smile he always wore when she finally figured something out for herself. She smiled back without realizing it. "Tomorrow morning," she answered. "I'll be there, Doctor," Mercer said, after the call ended. Amelia remained seated beneath the maple tree. The breeze gently stirred the new spring leaves above her. For the first time since Jonathan's funeral, the future no longer felt frightening. It felt meaningful. She wasn't protecting a secret anymore. She was preparing to fulfill the final promise she had unknowingly made to the only man who had ever truly called her daughter. The next morning arrived wrapped in a quiet blanket of mist. Long before sunrise, Amelia was already awake. She brewed a pot of coffee, just as Jonathan had done every morning for years, then carried a steaming mug onto the front porch. The farm was silent. For the first time in 14 years, Jonathan wasn't sitting in the old rocking chair beside her, watching the sun climb above the eastern fields. The empty chair hurt more than she expected. She rested her hand gently on its worn wooden arm. "I hope I'm doing the right thing," she whispered. The morning breeze answered with nothing more than the rustling of oak leaves. Just after 9 o'clock, a dark SUV rolled slowly down the gravel driveway. A second vehicle followed behind it. Neither carried company logos. Neither looked like the kind of truck Ryan would have hired to prepare the land for sale. Amelia stepped off the porch as a tall man in his early 60s climbed out of the first vehicle. His silver hair peeked from beneath a weathered felt hat, and a worn leather satchel hung across one shoulder. "Miss Prescott," she nodded. "I'm Dr. Daniel Mercer." They shook hands. His grip was warm but gentle. "I appreciate you calling," he said. "To be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect." "I wasn't sure either," Amelia admitted with a faint smile. 2 other people joined him. A preservation specialist named Linda Brooks, and a document conservator named Professor Alan Green from a nearby university. Each carried cases filled with cameras, gloves, notebooks, and preservation equipment. Amelia led them across the pasture without saying much. The old north barn stood quietly beneath the clear spring sky. "Doctor," Mercer stopped several feet from the doors. He studied the building carefully before speaking. "How old is it?" Jonathan believed his grandfather built it sometime in the late 19th century. "Doctor," Mercer nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes old buildings remember things that people forget." Amelia smiled. Jonathan used to say something very similar. Inside the barn, the 3 visitors looked around with polite curiosity. Old wagons, broken tools, dust-covered shelves. Nothing unusual. Professor Green glanced toward Amelia. "This is where you found the documents." She nodded. "Not exactly." She walked toward the far corner and slowly brushed away the loose hay. Within seconds, the outline of the trapdoor appeared once again. Linda looked surprised. "I don't believe." Amelia grasped the iron ring and lifted. The hidden staircase slowly revealed itself. No one spoke. "Doctor." Mercer adjusted his glasses and stepped closer. "My goodness." His voice became almost a whisper. "You weren't exaggerating." He descended first. Amelia followed with the lantern. The others came behind them. The moment Dr. Mercer reached the cellar floor, he stopped walking altogether. For nearly half a minute, no one said a word. The only sound was the soft echo of their breathing. Finally, Professor Green removed his glasses and stared at the shelves stretching into the dim light. "I've spent 35 years studying colonial archives," he whispered. "I've never seen anything like this." Linda slowly approached the nearest cedar chest. Even before opening it, she noticed Jonathan's careful handwritten labels. She smiled quietly. Whoever organized this, I understood exactly what they were preserving. Amelia looked toward Jonathan's journal resting safely on the small wooden table. "He did, Doctor." Mercer carefully opened one chest after another. His expression changed each time. Curiosity, surprise, disbelief, then genuine awe. He unfolded one military map with gloved hands. His eyes widened. "This paper." He looked toward Professor Green. 18th century linen stock. Green nodded slowly. It appears authentic. Another bundle contained supply ledgers. Another revealed sealed military correspondence. One leather folder held dozens of personal letters written by Revolutionary War soldiers. Linda carefully brushed dust from one document. A signature appeared beneath the faded ink. She looked toward Dr. Mercer. "You need to see this." He stepped closer. The moment he read the name, he froze. For several long seconds, he simply stared. Finally, he looked back at Amelia. "Miss Prescott." His voice had become noticeably quieter. "Do you understand what this could be?" She shook her head. "Not really. I only know Jonathan wanted it protected." "Doctor," Mercer smiled softly, "I think your father understood exactly what he was leaving behind." "Father?" The word caught Amelia off guard. He hadn't said, "Mr. Prescott." He hadn't said, "your adoptive father." Simply, "Father." Something inside her healed a little. For the next several hours, the team photographed documents without removing them. Every crate was numbered. Every shelf carefully recorded. Nothing was disturbed unnecessarily. Around midday, they gathered around the small wooden table where Jonathan's journal still rested. "Doctor," Mercer removed his glasses. "In my profession," he began quietly, "we're trained not to make dramatic statements until every fact has been verified." He paused. "But I can tell you this. If the collection is as complete as it appears, this may become one of the most significant privately preserved Revolutionary War archives discovered in generations." The words hung quietly in the cellar. Amelia looked around once more. Yesterday she had seen old boxes. Today she saw stories, leaves, sacrifices, families separated by war, dreams that had survived nearly 250 years beneath an ordinary barn floor. Dr. Mercer continued. "People often ask historians what history is worth." He smiled gently. "My answer has never changed. History isn't valuable because someone can insure it. It's valuable because once it's lost, no amount of money can ever bring it back." Amelia immediately thought of Jonathan. That sounded exactly like something he would have said. Later that afternoon, as the team packed away their equipment, "Doctor," Mercer handed Amelia a folder. Inside was a preliminary preservation agreement. "If you choose," he said, "the Commonwealth, the National Archives, and several universities would like to work with you to preserve everything exactly where your father kept it." "You mean, the collection doesn't have to leave the farm?" "No. In fact," he replied with a smile, "we believe that's precisely where it belongs." Amelia looked through the open barn doors toward the fields Jonathan had loved. The wind moved gently across the pasture. She could almost picture him standing there, hat in hand, smiling without saying a word. She closed the folder. "I have one condition." The historians looked at her. "The barn stays. No developer tears it down. No museum moves it somewhere else." She glanced around the old wooden walls. This building protected these stories for generations. It deserves to remain part of the story. "Doctor," Mercer smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." For the first time since Jonathan's funeral, Amelia no longer felt like the orphan who had spent years trying to earn a place in someone else's family. She had become something else. Not the owner of a hidden archive, not the heir to a remarkable discovery, but the guardian Jonathan had believed she could become all along. A few months passed. Summer slowly settled over Lancaster County, turning the rolling hills a deep shade of green. The old Prescott farm looked much as it always had, but word of the hidden archive had quietly spread through the historical community. Researchers arrived from universities across Pennsylvania. Archivists traveled from Washington. Preservation experts spent weeks documenting every journal, every military map, every faded letter that Jonathan Prescott had protected for so many years. Not once did Amelia leave their side. She learned how to handle fragile paper with cotton gloves. She listened as historians explained the stories hidden behind names and signatures she had never recognized before. For the first time in her life, she felt as though she wasn't simply witnessing history. She was helping preserve it. One warm August morning, Dr. Mercer arrived carrying a thick folder. He found Amelia repairing the white fence near the pasture, exactly as Jonathan had taught her years before. "I have some news," he said with a smile. Amelia leaned the hammer against the fence. "Good news. The very best kind." They sat together on the front porch, where Jonathan had spent so many evenings watching the sunset. "Doctor." Mercer handed her the folder. Inside was an official letter bearing the seal of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. After months of careful examination, every major document inside the cellar had been authenticated. The collection included military correspondence, supply records, personal journals, and several maps believed to have been lost since the Revolutionary War. Historians described the discovery as one of the most important privately preserved historical archives found in decades. Near the bottom of the report, one sentence caught Amelia's attention. The estimated insurance value of the collection exceeds $10 million. She quietly closed the folder. "Doctor," Mercer smiled. "I thought that number might surprise you." Amelia shook her head gently. "It doesn't." He looked at her curiously. "Not anymore." She looked across the fields where Jonathan had spent most of his life. "He always told me that the things worth protecting usually couldn't be measured." "Doctor," Mercer nodded. "I believe he was right." Within weeks, newspapers across the state began telling the story. Most headlines focused on the remarkable discovery beneath an old barn. Some wrote about the collection's historical importance. Others wrote about its extraordinary value. But the story people remembered most wasn't about the documents. It was about the young woman who refused to sell them. Offers came from private collectors, museums overseas, even wealthy investors who promised Amelia enough money to change her life forever. She thanked each of them, then politely declined. "This history doesn't belong to me," she told one reporter. "It belongs to every family who still believes the past deserves to be remembered." Her words spread far beyond Pennsylvania. One afternoon, Ryan drove onto the farm without calling first. It had been weeks since Amelia had spoken to any of the brothers. He stood awkwardly near the porch, his hands in his pockets. "I saw you on television," he said. Amelia smiled politely. "I wasn't expecting visitors." Neither of them spoke for a moment. Finally, Ryan sighed. "I came to apologize." She looked at him quietly. "I spent my whole life thinking Dad measured success by what we owned," he admitted. "I never realized he was measuring something completely different." His voice grew softer. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know. I finally understand." Amelia could see the regret in his eyes. Real regret. Not because of the money. Because he had lost years he could never recover. She stepped closer. "Jonathan never stopped loving you." Ryan lowered his head. "I know. He deserved better sons." Amelia gently shook her head. "He spent his whole life hoping you'd become better men." Ryan looked toward the old barn standing peacefully across the pasture. "Maybe. It's not too late." She smiled. "I don't think he'd ever stop believing that." Over the following months, Ethan and Lucas came as well. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Sometimes they helped to repair fences. Sometimes they volunteered during historical tours. Little by little. The bitterness that had lived on the farm for so many years began to fade, not because the past disappeared, but because people finally chose to face it honestly. The following spring, hundreds of local residents gathered beneath the old oak tree overlooking the fields. A small bronze plaque stood near the entrance of the restored north barn. Children from nearby schools carried American flags. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with historians. Families spread blankets across the grass. Dr. Mercer stepped to the podium. "This barn once looked like an ordinary building," he began. "But sometimes the greatest chapters of history are hidden inside the places people overlook." He turned toward Amelia. "So are the greatest people." The audience applauded. Amelia felt tears fill her eyes, not because of the applause, but because she wished Jonathan could have been standing beside her. She imagined him tipping his old hat, embarrassed by all the attention, probably reminding everyone that the coffee inside was getting cold. The thought made her smile through her tears. When it was Amelia's turn to speak, she stood quietly before the crowd. For a moment, she looked toward the old farmhouse, toward the porch, toward Jonathan's empty rocking chair. Then she looked back at the people gathered before her. "When I was a little girl," she began softly, "I believed being part of a family meant sharing the same last name." She paused. "Jonathan Prescott taught me something much greater. He taught me that family is built one act of kindness at a time." She looked toward the barn. "He didn't leave me the most valuable thing he owned. He left me the thing he trusted me to protect, and that trust changed my life." The crowd stood in silence. Some wiped away tears. Others simply nodded. As the ceremony ended and the American flag rose gently into the spring sky, Amelia remained standing beneath the old oak tree. For years, she had believed she was the little orphan who had been given a place to stay. Now she understood the truth. Jonathan Prescott had never given her charity. He had given her dignity. He had given her purpose. He had given her a home. And in the quiet way only a truly loving father could. He had made sure the world would one day know exactly who his daughter was. Years passed. The old north barn still stood quietly beneath the Pennsylvania sky. Visitors came from across the country to see the remarkable Revolutionary War archive hidden beneath its weathered floor. But when they left, most of them weren't talking about the documents. They were talking about Jonathan Prescott and the young woman he chose to trust. Every Sunday morning, before the first visitors arrived, Amelia followed the same routine. She unlocked the barn, walked down into the quiet cellar, rested her hand on Jonathan's leather journal for just a moment. Then she climbed back into the morning sunlight and brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for herself. The other she placed beside Jonathan's old rocking chair on the porch. No one ever drank it. She never stopped making it, because some people never truly leave us. One autumn afternoon, a little boy noticed the untouched cup. "Who's that coffee for?" he asked. Amelia smiled toward the empty chair. "My father. But I thought he passed away." "He did." "Then why do you still make his coffee?" Amelia looked across the fields Jonathan had loved for nearly 50 years. Then she answered quietly, "Because love doesn't disappear when someone is gone. It simply finds another way to stay." The boy smiled. Before leaving, he carefully straightened the coffee cup on the little table beside the chair. His grandmother quietly wiped away a tear. Years later, people still asked Amelia if she wished Jonathan had simply left her the money instead. She always smiled. "He gave me something far more valuable. He believed in me. And once someone truly believes in you, you spend the rest of your life trying to become the person they already saw." As the seasons came and went, the hidden cellar became part of American history. But that wasn't the story people remembered most. They remembered an orphan who chose kindness when bitterness would have been easier. They remembered an old farmer who proved that family is built by love, not by blood. And they remembered that the greatest inheritance is never measured in dollars. It's measured in trust. Because in the end, people rarely remember what we owned. They remember how we made them feel. Safe, valued, loved. If Jonathan and Amelia's story reminded you of someone who quietly changed your life, don't wait. Tell them. Because sometimes, the words we leave unspoken become the only inheritance we never get the chance to give.